Hi, afternoon everyone. Welcome to today's side event from Mine Action Review. It's great to see so many colleagues from the mine action sector here with us in the room. So we're going to present today a very quick overview of who Mine Action Review is, kind of a little bit about who we are, what we do and our origins, and then provide a briefing on the global progress in addressing anti-personnel mine contamination and cluster munition contamination based on Mine Action Review's latest reports that were published last year. And then I'll be handing over to my colleague Alex, who's going to present a little bit on Mine Action Review's work and publications on the environment and on what national authorities and implementing partners should be considering with respect to integrating the environment into their survey and clearance programming. Hopefully we'll also have time for questions and answers at the end and any comments you have from the floor. So, starting off with who we are. So, Mine Action Review is an independent project. We're published by Norwegian People's Aid. We conduct the primary research and analysis on landmine and cluster munition remnant contamination worldwide and on survey and clearance efforts to address it, with a view to furthering full implementation of Article 5 of the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention and Article 4 of the Convention on Cluster Munitions. We collate and analyse data globally from mine action centres, from national authorities, from national and international clearance operators, and other implementing partners, including UNMAS, UNDP and Geneva Centre. And it really is a collaborative effort. Many people in this room contribute and collaborate with us on the country research, so thank you to those that do. And the country reports are really intended to serve as an implementation tool for the sector to look at enhancing progress in identifying and then addressing contamination and ultimately saving lives and limbs. So just quickly, when we came into effect, we were first published. The first Clearing the Mines report was published in 2014. Up until that point, the research had been conducted by researchers under MPA, under the Landmine and Cluster Munition Monitor. But in 2014, MPA really felt that rather than just recording and monitoring survey and clearance data, we really needed to start analysing it as well, to look at where things are going well, but importantly, where the challenges are, what the recommendations are, for it to be used as an implementation tool for national authorities, donors, their implementing partners. And that's when a scoring criteria based on performance was introduced as a way of having it as an implementation tool. So that's when we came about. We're now completely separate to the Landmine and Cluster Munition Monitor. Of course, they cover victim assistance, stockpile destruction, universalisation. Mine Action Review only focuses on survey and clearance. We've kind of evolved as a project since then and strengthened. So in 2019, we revised and reassessed our criteria that we assess for state parties, and we introduced a criterion on gender and diversity and a section on that in all of our separate country reports. And then in 2024, so last year, we also introduced a criterion on environmental policies and action, which my colleague Alex is going to talk a bit more about later. So between 2016 and 24, we had an advisory board comprising HALO, MAG and Norwegian People's Aid, and we want to thank them for their support to the project. We will not have an advisory board this year, and that's due to Mine Action Review's requirement that all our advisory board members need to fully commit to supporting the general provisions of both the Mine Ban Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions without exception, and that hasn't been possible for one of our advisory board members. So we won't have an advisory board this year, but we may look to re-establish one next year with a clear mandate that serves the project, maybe also engaging with other clearance operators. And in the meantime, we'll keep working in close collaboration with all clearance operators, implementing partners and national authorities, and the reports will be published as normal by MPA. We're funded thanks to the governments of Canada, Norway and Switzerland, and also France provided support to the project in 2024, and we hope maybe this year as well. We're also seeking to bring on board new donors to help support the project and maintain it in these difficult funding climates. So we do have a shortfall at the moment, so any governments in the room that use the report that would like to support, please do reach out to us. So who are the Mine Action Review team? So we're 7 core people in the team. Myself, my name's Lucy Pinches. I'm project manager of Mine Action Review. We have Stuart Maslin, who's the editor of the project. He's based in London. Then we have my colleague Alex Frost, who's a senior researcher and our lead on the environment. We have Nick Cumming-Bruce, who's a senior researcher based in France. Don't know if you want to wave, Nick, at the front here. Louise Wilson, who's a researcher based in the UK. And then Lauren Deglaire, who covers our French and Spanish-speaking countries based in France. We have 2 further colleagues, Arula Dowd and Emil Hazanov, who cover Arabic and Russian-speaking desk research and translations for the project. And as you see, we also have, I should mention as well, our colleague Frances Smith. She's not in the room, but she is here in Geneva. She's just covering another meeting. So there's quite a few of us in Geneva this week if you'd like to engage and reach out with your country researchers and discuss the project more. So turning now to actually the findings of last year's report, I'm going to start by presenting the findings from the Clearing the Mines 2024 report. For those not familiar with the reports, we have the big main report online, which includes a global overview, and then we also have separate individual country reports that are very comprehensive for every landmine affected state worldwide and other areas. And both the main report and the individual country reports can be downloaded from the Mine Action Review website, so mineactionreview.org. So I'm going to start by just giving an overview of the global state of contamination. Globally, at least 58 states and 2 other areas, so territories, are affected by anti-personnel mines, and that includes 36 state parties to the Mine Ban Treaty, 22 non-signatories and 2 other areas. We added Central African Republic to the list of state parties this year as it has improvised mine contamination, and we also removed Nagorno-Karabakh as another area because that's now covered under the Azerbaijan report. So in terms of geographical spread and contamination, Asia, including the Middle East, is the most affected continent by the number of countries. That's 23 mine-contaminated states. Africa is the second most contaminated region, followed by Europe and then the Americas. We are looking at whether Mexico should be added to the list of affected states because we're also seeing victim-activated improvised devices being used there now. So we're looking into that this year. So moving on to the extent of mine contamination in state parties, this is. And this table summarises what we think is the extent of actual contamination based on our assessment. So as you can see, we believe 4 state parties, that's Afghanistan, Cambodia, Iraq and Ukraine, are massively contaminated. So that's defined as more than 100 square kilometres of land. The extent of Ukraine's mine contamination threat has been upgraded from heavy to massive, and that's based on extremely widespread use of mines by Russia on Ukrainian territory in the ongoing conflict. And of course, we know there has been reports as well of Ukraine's use, which is in violation of its obligations as a state party to the treaty. Heavy contamination, so that exists that's between 20 and 100 square kilometres, is in Angola, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Thailand, Turkey and Yemen. And then in the other 27 affected state parties, we believe the extent of contamination is either medium or light. So now looking at the efforts to address contamination. So this data relates to 2023, the land release data does. This year we'll be reporting the 2024 data. So in 2023, more than 237 square kilometres of mines was cleared. That's a 26% increase on the previous year and the highest clearance output record ever recorded. And for the second year, the main reason for that big global increase was another big uplift in state party Cambodia, and that was primarily because of increase by national operators, notably the Cambodian Mine Action Centre, CMAC, the engineers of the Royal Cambodian Army, and the National Centre for Peacekeeping Forces, NPMEC. Mine Action Review actually made an estimate of the clearance data for these entities, as I think the data that was reported almost certainly included some technical surveys. So we only report clearance numbers here, not through survey, so we made an estimation there. And then 94% of mined area cleared occurred in state parties, showing kind of the spread and the impact of the convention. And notably, the 4 state parties with the greatest annual clearance output, that's Afghanistan, Cambodia, Croatia and Iraq, together accounted for 85% of all mined areas cleared in 2023. So over 192,000 AP mines were destroyed worldwide through land release and EOD operations across 26 states, 7 states not party, and 2 other areas, and that's a 10% drop on the previous year. Several thousand mines destroyed were of an improvised nature, which of course are covered by the Anti-Personnel Mine Convention. The operational know-how on how to address these devices has continued to increase over recent years. The greatest number of mines destroyed in 2023 was in Zimbabwe, so over 37,000, followed by Turkey, over 33,000, Sri Lanka, over 19,000. Unfortunately, no state party declared fulfilment of its Article 5 clearance obligations in 2023 or 2024, but we believe that Oman may have just completed clearance, and that's being verified at the moment, so we look forward to it declaring completion this year. So turning on Article 5 implementation, the extent and the performance in Article 5 implementation varies between state parties. Of the 36 mine-affected state parties, only 1 was firmly believed to be on track to meet its deadline, so that's Oman, as I mentioned, which we believe has now completed. And 8 state parties sought an extension request in Siem Reap last year. No other state party was on track to meet its current deadline. It's a busy year for extension requests under the treaty this year. We have at least 13 extension requests being considered, and that's largely as a result of state parties aligning their clearance deadline to the 2025 goal. We understand that Burkina Faso and Mali are also submitting requests, as they didn't previously have an obligation, but they are now facing improvised mines from use by non-state armed groups. So we'll welcome those extension requests, because that does fit under their Article 5 obligations. There's some big extension requests this year. We have Cambodia submitting its, which of course will need to address the mined area on the border with Thailand. We have Ecuador's not on this list, as we hope it may actually be able to complete by its Article 5 deadline, which will be another step forward for the convention. So despite each having an obligation to clear mines as soon as possible, less than half a square kilometre of mined area was conducted in 12 state parties. That said, Yemen did conduct over 9 square kilometres of emergency clearance that resulted in destruction of over 500 mines and a large amount of AV mines and unexploded ordnance. There's no area clearance was recorded or reported in 2023 for 10 state parties, which should be of real concern to the treaty and the sector. There's also far too many instances of suspected mined areas that are being cleared that prove to have no anti-personnel mine contamination or contamination from other explosive ordnance. So it's really important to look at the efficiency of the use of evidence-based survey to make sure that we're only using the costly and time-intensive assets where there is actually contamination, and reducing uncontaminated land through non-technical survey and technical survey. So moving on to programme performance, we have 8 criterion that we assess the performance of state parties on. As mentioned, we introduced a new criterion on the environment that my colleague Alex is going to talk about. And these 8 criterion, we want them to be viewed as alongside the recommendations for action, and they're really intended as an implementation tool. So they're offered in the spirit of constructive dialogue to really assist states to see where the challenges are, to overcome them so that they can implement Article 5 as efficiently as possible. So turning to the results of our assessment briefly, and the full, everything I'm presenting is available also in the overview to the report. No Mine Action Centre was rated as very good, but that's partly as a result of the environment criterion that brought the scores down slightly compared to last year. Zimbabwe remained the top scoring state party, so congratulations, an excellent example to other state parties to follow. DR Congo, Ecuador and Guinea-Bissau all moved up from poor the previous year to average, reflecting a strengthening of their performance. The greatest improvement in performance for 2023 was in Guinea-Bissau, followed by Ecuador and Oman. The greatest drop in performance in 2023 was registered in Sudan, and that reflects a cessation of demining as a result of the armed conflict that broke out there in April 2023. So while Nigeria, it should be noted, is actually slowly strengthening its performance, and Mine Action Centre that's newly established, it was rated as very poor together with Eritrea and Niger, who both declined in performance, unfortunately. But we were pleased to see Eritrea re-engage in Siem Reap with the convention and provide an update on what it's doing, which is positive. And we heard that Niger is seeking financial support for its implementation, which is hampering its progress at the moment. I just wanted to flag quickly that we do also monitor 24 indicators in the Oslo Action Plan, which is the 5-year action plan of the Mine Ban Treaty. It's basically the kind of roadmap for how to implement the treaty. This year, we will actually be monitoring the Siem Reap action plan that was adopted last year at the review conference. That action plan builds on the strong foundations of the Oslo Action Plan, and we commend Cambodia for the very collaborative and consultative approach it took to elaborating the new action plan, which we think sets a very strong foundation for our collective efforts over the next 5 years. So I'll let you look at the report itself for the 24 results, but I just wanted to highlight 5 very quickly. And because we want this to be used as a way of states and their partners identifying where the gaps are and then addressing them. So only 13% of state parties we assessed to have an accurate baseline of contamination, which of course is essential to then be able to plan to how you address it. Only 80% of state parties, sorry, let me move it backwards. Yeah, only 80% of state parties had evidence-based, costed and time-bound national strategies and work plans, another essential element that all states should have. 53% of state parties have national standards that take into account the international mine action standards. 50% have integrated gender and diversity. And then only 13 state parties have in-country coordination mechanisms or platforms. So there's plenty of scope for improvement. I thought it was useful just to show a bar chart of the last 5 years of clearance. And with the exception of a slight dip in 2021, which is probably likely due to the COVID-19 pandemic, year-on-year clearance is has steadily increased, and that's largely thanks to Cambodia's output. If we actually take out Cambodia from the clearance figures, so the dark blue ones exclude Cambodian clearance numbers, we actually see a slightly different picture, that it's actually a maintained rate of clearance, and the 2023 level is actually a slight reduction on the level in 2019. And we're currently collecting data for 2024. So moving on quickly now to cluster munitions. So again, the full report, the overview and individual country reports for every cluster munition contaminated country are available on the website. We see that in terms of contamination, we have, or in terms of clearance, sorry, first, globally, 185 square kilometres was cleared in 2023. That's an 8% increase on the previous year, and it's a new annual record. We saw the destruction of over 96,500 unexploded submunitions. That's a slight drop on the previous year. And the increase in 2023 clearance is largely the result of increases in clearance in Southeast Asia. So the People's Democratic Republic, Lao PDR, a state party to the convention, and then non-state parties Cambodia and Vietnam, all increasing their clearance output in 2023. Together with Iraq, those 4 countries account for 88% of all clearance worldwide. So looking at clearance in state parties in 2023, 42% of global clearance area and 76% of the submunitions destroyed were in state parties to the convention. So hopefully that shows that it's more targeted and evidence-based clearance that is happening in state parties. Bosnia and Herzegovina completed its cluster munition clearance in September 2023, so congratulations to BHMAC. They're still facing and now addressing the landmine contamination. Chile commenced clearance for the first time since becoming a state party. It also conducted some technical survey, but unfortunately hasn't been able to secure clearance, secure international national funding, for 2024 and 2025. So we saw its extension request presented at the CCM Intersessionals this week. And then Lao PDR cleared by far the most land and destroyed the most submunitions. And then the rest of the affected state parties, unfortunately, either saw a drop in clearance output compared to the previous year, or otherwise levels remained the same. 3 state parties, Chad, Mauritania and Somalia, conducted no clearance of cluster munitions in 2023, which again should be a concern. But we did hear from Somalia this week at the intersessional meetings that it doesn't actually have access to that cluster munition contamination because of control by non-state armed groups of those parts of the country. So turning to the extent of contamination, globally at least 24 states and 2 other areas are affected by cluster munition remnants. That includes 10 state parties to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, 1 signatory, that's DR Congo, 13 non-signatories and 2 other areas. South Sudan, a contaminated state, acceded to the CCM in September 2023, which is a welcome development. Angola, a signatory to the convention, we no longer consider to be cluster munition affected, as we believe that that contamination is actually only residual contamination now. So we encourage Angola to do that assessment and think about making a declaration of completion of its cluster munition clearance. And evidence has surfaced of the existence of a possible cluster munition contamination in Ethiopia, which we're looking into. And state non-party Myanmar might also have cluster munition contaminated areas on its territory following use of cluster munitions by government forces there. And that's not certain, but another thing that we're looking into. And then finally, we're also reports of potential use of cluster munitions by Ukraine in Russian territory. So this table shows the extent of cluster munition remnant contamination worldwide. It's based again on Mine Action Review's own assessment. Lao PDR has by far the greatest contamination, so that's assessed to be over 1,000 square kilometres. Then non-signatories, Cambodia, Ukraine, Vietnam, together with state party Iraq, have huge contamination, so that's between 100 and 1,000 square kilometres. And of course, the use of cluster munitions in Ukraine by both Russian and Ukrainian armed forces is adding to contamination there. The extent of contamination in all of the remaining states is either medium or light, so less than 100 square kilometres. Looking at the status of Article 4 implementation under the CCM, only one state party is currently on track, and that's the latest, South Sudan, that needs to complete clearance by February 2034. Germany and Lao PDR were granted extension requests at 12 MSP last year. Of course, the extent of contamination in Lao PDR means it will need many more extension requests before it completes clearance. Germany may be able to complete in the next one. It remains to be seen. And then Afghanistan, Chile, Lebanon, Mauritania and Somalia have all submitted Article 4 extension requests for consideration at 13 MSP in September, so they will be considered and granted then. Chad requires international funding. It only has cluster munition contamination now in one province, and it's a suspected contamination in Tibesti. So once, if it can secure funding to do that survey, Chad could actually be the next state party off the Article 4 list. And then, of course, Iraq had its extension request granted last year, but has continued to identify previously unknown contamination and is suffering from funding challenges. So it will probably be many more extension requests also for Iraq before it can declare completion. So again, looking at performance, it's the same 8 criteria that are used to assess cluster munitions state parties. Again, no state was ranked as being very good, but Germany and Lebanon were the joint top scoring state parties, along with Lao PDR maintained a ranking of good. And then in addition, South Sudan was also ranked as good in our assessment, our first assessment since it became a state party. Afghanistan, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Chile, Iraq, Mauritania were ranked as average. Chad remained poor, Somalia remained very poor, but we've heard it is doing its best to address, and it can't actually access those areas. And then I wanted to just flag that we also do the monitoring of the 5-year action plan under the Convention on Cluster Munitions, so the Lausanne Action Plan. We monitor 20 indicators for that, so the report is available on Mine Action Review's website. And we hope that states and their implementing partners can use that as well to identify where the gaps are and to fill them between now and the next review conference. So Lao PDR is president of the 3rd review conference of the CCM next year, and we look forward to that presidency. So I'm just going to wrap up with a few words on what the outlook is for survey and clearance efforts globally and what's possible, and also what some of the challenges are. So with respect to landmines, what's possible by the 6th review conference, which will be in 2029? As we saw, most state parties have medium or light contamination, so it really should be possible for those to complete by the next review conference, with the exception of those where there's ongoing armed conflict. Cluster munition remnant contamination, what's possible? Nobody is on track to complete for the review conference in Lao PDR next year, but the next review conference will be in 2031. So what's possible by that, which will be another kind of landmark date in the history of the convention? By the 4th review conference in 2021, we really think that Afghanistan, Chad, Chile, Germany, Lebanon, Mauritania, Somalia and South Sudan could be free of cluster munitions by that review conference. And that would be a real achievement for the convention, and it absolutely is something that the community should be aiming for. So those, what is possible? It is possible, it's ambitious, but it is achievable if we have political will, effective planning, strong national standards that support efficient and effective land release methodology, so the good use of evidence-based survey, and then very targeted clearance, good information management systems, and then sufficient and sustained funding. Affected states with their respective donors and other implementing partners must concretely plan and commit in order to honour these time-bound obligations under the conventions. And we encourage everyone to convene coordinating mechanisms. It's called the Country Coalition under the CCM, National Mine Action Platforms under the Mine Ban Treaty, but just bring together their implementing partners and donors a couple of times a year to make sure that everybody's pulling in the same direction and meeting these targets so we can actually get to completion. But there are, of course, challenges, as we're hearing and no doubt will come out this week. The US funding freeze has unfortunately really impacted operations in 2025, and it led to thousands of deminers needing to kind of down their detectors. Some PMWRA contracts have unfortunately been cancelled, so we know that many states have been negatively impacted. And then many have received waivers, but the result of the US review of their programs hasn't been announced, and it's due to be announced this month. So then we'll kind of see the full extent of what US funding will be for the sector. And of course, the US is the biggest donor to the mine action sector, so it's likely to have a significant impact. We're also seeing challenges with countries needing to increase their security budgets in light of kind of world events. And that, unfortunately, is being seen at the expense of overseas aid budgets. So we're likely to see mine action budgets start to decrease. We hope they don't, but that there's indications that mine action budgets are at risk. So we welcome that state parties to the Mine Ban Treaty are exploring a voluntary trust fund for Article 5 implementation as a mechanism to help affected state parties in need of international assistance, but which are currently receiving very little support from the main donors to mine action. What we really want to see is that we don't have some affected states under the convention that are making no progress between meetings of state parties each year and are just stagnating in their progress. So we hope that this is something that that gets support and that state parties can commit to elaborating and creating this voluntary trust fund under the treaty. Another challenge is the new use of mines, including improvised mines. We're seeing that quite widespread use now in some areas by non-state armed groups. So, and also use of cluster munitions, and that's adding to the contamination levels and also to the cost to address contamination. And then we are facing really quite grave challenges to both conventions, with state parties either withdrawing or indicating their intention to withdraw. So sadly, we've seen Lithuania leave the Convention on Cluster Munitions, and we're extremely concerned that Poland and the Baltic states are now considering withdrawing from the Mine Ban Convention. We, of course, urge against this. We hope that they can reconsider that discussion, that decision. The cluster munitions and mines, of course, all weapons have some military utility, but these weapons, cluster munitions and landmines, it's a very limited military utility, and the humanitarian impact of the weapons by far outweighs the military utility, and that is how the conventions came into effect in the first place. It's important to look beyond just the Ukraine situation and the situation in Eastern Europe and the far-reaching implications that it will have for the convention if we have state parties withdraw and potentially start producing and using mines. These weapons were banned for a reason, and that humanitarian reason still remains unchanged now. So it's now more important now than ever that states can support and commit to the treaties and to upholding international law. So I'm going to leave it there. We're very happy to answer questions at the end on any of our research, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Alex that's going to talk a bit about the environmental side of mine action. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. So, as Lucy mentioned, I'm going to be talking about Mine Action Review's work on the environment. In 2021, we published our first report on the environmental impact of mine action, and the intention of that was to raise awareness in the sector. And since then, we've seen real progress, and I would encourage you to attend today's plenary session at 3 p.m. on managing environmental and climate considerations in mine action, and also tomorrow's side event at 8 a.m. in Room B on climate and environmental risks, which are both great examples of that growing focus and action. Some key developments from last year include the revised UNMAS 713 on environmental management and climate change and its accompanying technical note, as well as strong inclusion of environmental considerations in the CM REAP Anchor Action Plan adopted at the 5th Review Conference. And most recently, MPA and CEOBS launched the Green Field Tool, which you'll hear much more about later today, to support environmental screening and assessments in mine action operations. Despite these gains, there's more to be done. Mine Action Review's latest environmental report, which was released at the end of last year and is available on our website, advocates moving from a do-no-harm approach to proactive environmental stewardship, integrating environmental protection and climate resilience at every stage of mine action. So, as Lucy mentioned, in 2024, we introduced a new environment and climate change criteria into Mine Action Review's assessment of national programmes of state parties to the APMBC and CCM. So we look at whether the National Mine Action Programme has an environmental management policy, whether there's a national mine action standard that's aligned with UNMAS 713, whether environmental assessments are conducted to inform planning and operations, are mitigation measures being implemented to reduce environmental harm, and are climate-related risks like flooding or displacement being factored into planning and prioritisation. This year, we're also asking a question within our questionnaire whether programmes have an environmental focal point, as we see these roles as really being critical to building partnerships, supporting coordination, bridging capacity gaps, providing expertise, and with the ultimate aim of ensuring that environmental and climate considerations are integrated across operations. So, starting with environmental policies, they are essential to come into compliance with UNMAS. The second edition now requires that national mine action authorities and operators have a climate and environmental policy in place. They are also an increasing requirement from donors. These policies define principles for minimising harm, protecting biodiversity and mitigating climate impact. They also help ensure alignment with national regulations and international frameworks like the Paris Agreement and Sendai framework. We're pleased to report that most mine action organisations have an organisation-wide environmental policy, and there's an increasing number of programme-specific policies or standing operating procedures in place. However, only a selection of affected states, Afghanistan, Armenia, Israel, Mauritania, South Sudan, Sudan and Zimbabwe, report having an environmental policy, and even then it's not always clear whether these explicitly relate to mine action. Other states such as Croatia, Chile, Colombia and Germany apply national environmental legislation to mine action, and in Ukraine the National Mine Action Strategy includes environmental concerns. Currently only 15 mine or cluster munition remnant affected states have a national mine action standard on the environment, and these will obviously need to be updated to bring them in line with Edition 2. So environmental screening and assessments are vital for understanding the potential impact of mine action operations and identifying how best to mitigate risks. UNMAS 713 stipulates that national mine action authorities or organisations acting on its behalf must ensure that these assessments, to include where necessary environmental impact assessments, are made to support informed decision making. Several operators, including DCA, DRC, MPA and HALO, and several national mine action authorities are already integrating environmental assessments into land release operations. A notable example is the aforementioned Green Field tool, which supports programs to understand their operating environment, assess potential risks, identify mitigation measures, demonstrate compliance with UNMAS. It's designed for use across survey, clearance, disposal areas, camps and access routes. And it's got two components, which include the environmental profile and then the environmental assessment, which allows a program to set out the environmental characteristics of an area before activities or project work take place, and then go on to assess the risk of potential environmental impact of those activities and assign mitigation measures. So environmental mitigations measures in the report, we featured a number of different measures that organisations are implementing to reduce their environmental footprint. These are practical, often innovative, and grounded in the local context. A few examples include solar power, which is used from, to charge for security lights and charging stations, and then across entire camps and offices, to waste management, recycling and reusing materials wherever possible. In Colombia, for example, CCCM partnered with a local recycling firm and offered staff training to improve sustainable waste practices. There's also opportunities for innovation. For example, in Vietnam, MPA collaborated with a village to produce grass-based sandbags rather than plastic-based sandbags, and which were found to have better blast resistance, no fire hazard, required no post-demolition cleanup, and supported local livelihoods. There's also the opportunity to mitigate against mechanical clearance, as has happened in Ukraine, where a FAO study conducted with FSD found that planting cover crops post-mechanical clearance would help to restore the organic matter and prevent erosion in soil. And then post-clearance, there can be really simple interventions like replanting trees, removing rubbish, or more widespread interventions where people are partnering with local organisations. For example, in Sri Lanka, HALO and a local partner planted mangroves after mechanical clearance had taken place, and these are now providing fish nurseries for the local community, and the local community is really involved in this ongoing care. So these examples show that these mitigation measures can be impactful and context-specific, and can go from the sort of high-tech, more cost-intensive to more local and small-scale. Climate change is already affecting mine action operations, as a lot of you undoubtedly know. That can include flooding in mine-contaminated areas, to extreme heat affecting clearance operations. And for that reason, it's important to include climate risk analysis as part of planning and task prioritisation. But there's also an opportunity to go further, and we featured a number of projects in the report that integrate climate resilience into mine action programmes in a way that also supports local livelihoods. For example, in Iraq, DCA partnered with a local organisation on a pilot project to clear contaminated land and then plant trees as part of a national Green Iraq campaign and train farmers in climate adaptive practices. In Afghanistan, DRC worked with the community in Monai village, which was a location that was facing contamination, isolation, underinvestment and climate-induced flooding. It cleared land, constructed an intake canal to improve irrigation and reduced water waste, which protected it from flooding, and also planted trees to stabilise the soil. And then in Tanzania, APOPO collaborated with a local partner to train farmers in agroforestry, establishing food forests with timber and fruit trees to improve soil health, prevent erosion and sequester carbon. So in the report, we also sent questionnaires out to donors and got a good response, which I think is reflective of the increasing focus they're placing on environment in mine action. Obviously, their expectations do help shape sector priorities, and many are now setting funding requirements and are allocating funding to better integrate the environment in mine action. That said, the organisations we spoke to noted challenges from inconsistent donor expectations to limited funds for scaling environmental integration. And while reducing carbon footprint is often prioritised, connections to peace building and long-term development can be overlooked. In the current funding climate, which we all know is challenging at the moment, integrating the environment in mine action also offers opportunities to explore new funding sources, including from disaster risk reduction, climate finance and SDG-aligned initiatives, which could support more holistic approaches. So, in conclusion, as we can see, the mine action sector has made really meaningful strides in integrating environmental protection and climate resilience, but these challenges are undoubtedly ongoing and evolving, and the sector will need to continue to respond to them, but also offer new opportunities to mine action programs to better meet the needs of affected communities, and ultimately, that is what it's all about. Key actions that we've identified, as Lucy mentioned, far too much land is being cleared with no mines found. That is a waste of resources and has a huge environmental impact. So, UNMAS compliant application of land release. As I've mentioned, the adoption of comprehensive environmental climate policies, state parties ensuring, affected states ensuring they have a national mine action standard in place and that it is up to date, that programs are integrating environment and climate assessments across their operations, that mitigation measures are being implemented, that climate risk is included in task planning and prioritisation, and also that there's robust monitoring and evaluation and knowledge sharing. To support this, funding needs to be ring-fenced and also explore the opportunity to tap into potentially new streams of funding. We need to strengthen partnerships. The mine action sector cannot do this alone. Environmental experts, local communities need to be involved in these processes. And just to reiterate the importance of appointing an environmental focal point, if that's possible within the programme, to really help that coordination and building capacity and ensuring progress is tracked and shared. Thank you so much for your time today. As Lucy said, we've now got time for questions, any comments. Look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alex. I think, of course, the kind of core of we want to get countries across the finishing line and to complete survey and clearance efforts, but how we do that is also important. So doing it responsibly, taking into account gender and diversity, taking into account the environment is important along the way. And, there's no point in doing land release if you're returning land to communities that doesn't have any topsoil because mechanical assets have been used at the wrong season and that soil has washed away. So all of these considerations and assessments are really important considerations for the sector. So just to remind people, here's our website. Please do download and use the reports. We can also be contacted. We very much welcome input, feedback on the reports for them to be used as discussion. Do you agree with our recommendations and findings? We're very open to sitting down. Our researchers are here this week, so hopefully they'll be trying to find as many of you as possible to sit down and see what's happening in your programs. And we're very happy to take questions now, or to take kind of comments related from your programs. We have a little bit of time to do that. So are there any questions on any aspect of the reports or on the environmental side as well from anyone in the room? Yeah, go ahead, thank you.
Well, first of all, not really a comment, but just for clarification purposes. I understand that in your assessment criteria, you integrated GDEI, and now you are also looking at the environmental aspect, while we have the other pillars of mine action, which are closely also linked to this, because when we talk of environment, then people are at the center of that in terms of resilience. Yeah. So what exactly informed the decision not to include VA and EORE in your assessment criteria? And then in terms of the methodology, you didn't really clarify what methodologies you use, what are your sources of data, do you verify this data to confirm that it's accurate, and what processes go into putting this data together. And then one final thing is on the possibly the challenges you encounter, because usually when we use assessment criteria that score, then we have that pushback from those that we assess. What has been the experience in terms of sharing this report? Has it elicited any pushbacks from the countries that you assess? I would like to know that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, a great set of questions. So on our criteria, these are the 8 that we assess state parties on. Our sole focus, kind of unlike the monitor that does cover victim assistance and the other aspects, our sole focus is on survey and clearance. So, and there's so much to cover just within that one area. So we kind of put our expertise to looking at what we think are the main elements that determine a successful survey and clearance programme. Some of those areas have a slightly greater weighting because we think they're fundamental to progress, so actually understanding the baseline of contamination and then the land release outputs and compliance. So they both get a 20%, the other criterion get a 10% weighting. We only assess state parties. At some points we had assessed some states not party, but it's quite difficult to get enough data to properly assess states not party, whereas states under the treaty, they have reporting requirements, so we use Article 7 transparency reports. We also send out comprehensive questionnaires to all national authorities, to all clearance operators, to implementing partners, UNMAS, UNDP and others. We take that data, we triangulate it, we analyse it. There are instances where we think where the data is inaccurate, we will put our assessment on it, so we don't necessarily solely report what our states themselves say. And then we share the draft reports, so we then prepare the draft reports and then we share them for comment with all stakeholders that have contributed data. We welcome feedback on them. And then they're published ahead of the meetings of state parties. So there is a kind of a verification, and we welcome feedback on all aspects and on the assessment and the recommendations. Really would like the reports to be used as a discussion in country to say, okay, what can we be doing to address this obstacle that is holding back progress and efficient and effective land release. In terms of pushback or challenges, generally we haven't seen that. When we first introduced the criteria, it actually led to a kind of re-engagement with the project because people wanted to see, okay, where does my programme sit across others? It isn't a fine precise science, because we try to apply the same methodology for rating the scorings across programs. But for example, it's quite difficult to compare cluster munition clearance at a former military base in Germany with performance in Lao PDR, for example, who's got, the extent of contamination is massive. But we do try and be totally consistent across the criteria. We meet as a team before we finish each year's assessment. We look at each other's scoring. We look to see if we've actually, I should say that in the overview to the reports, under each of these, we do actually list out what factors we look at for understanding of contamination, national ownership. So within each of these, there's a series of factors we look at to determine what we think is the score. And what we're really aiming to do is to look at where there's progress, so where things are going forward, and then also sometimes where there's decline, and to use that as a way of kind of flagging for hopefully then for donors and others to encourage addressing those issues. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. It does, but just a follow-up on the weighting, because if you say that you sometimes look at the context, so does the weighting also take into consideration the context? Because if you're weighting something on like understanding of contamination, the context could be quite different across countries. So giving it a weight of 20 in one country may not be the same as a 20% weight in another country.
Yeah, I mean, we keep the same, so the contexts are different, but we try to assess them in the same way. But we don't, for example, do scoring for certain states, such as Palestine, Cyprus. So those states that, for example, don't have access to mined areas that are under their territory but not under their control. But for the states that do have access to their mined areas, the state parties, we apply the same percentage, irrespective if it's a small amount of contamination or a large, because it's mainly about how is that contamination being addressed. Are there information management systems? Is it efficient land release? Is technical survey and non-technical survey being used first, and then technical survey and clearance? Is there a good strategy in place? Are there good standards in place to ensure this? Thanks.
Thank you, and just to appreciate that it's a good source of information for me as well, I refer to the website often to get information on specific countries. Thank you for the good work.
Thank you very much. That's good to hear. It's always good at the end of the process to know, and we really do hope it's being used and used as an implementation tool. Any other questions from audience members? Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much. I just wanted to find out, you mentioned Zimbabwe scored particularly well. So congrats to my countrymen. I just want to find out the key points where they did really well.
Maybe, so Louise is the country researcher for Zimbabwe, so maybe she can say a few words. Thanks.
Okay, is that working? Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you for that question. So Zimbabwe has just shown very consistently strong national ownership and program management for a number of years. They have extremely good kind of coordination with operators and implementing partners, very good kind of dialogue and cooperation there. And I mean, obviously the report is there. You can, and I'd be happy to talk to you about the finer points after the meeting, if that was helpful. But yeah, just very consistent, very strong program, well coordinated. And making progress continually despite very difficult circumstances year on year, and strong on certain elements like the environment as well, gender and diversity, some of those cross-cutting areas as well.
Yeah, thanks. And I think Zimbabwe is a great example because it's not that easy a kind of political and operating environment, but despite that, and it sits under the Ministry of Defence, despite all of this, it is possible to have good collaboration, to have strong information management systems, to have really identified where the contamination is, to have good, strong national strategies, to have good standards in place. We were really hoping that Zimbabwe is on the very final kind of stretch of towards completion. Unfortunately, I think it will have been impacted by the US funding decision. So really just to encourage donors in the room to stick with Zimbabwe. It will be a huge success story for the convention when it achieves completion. So yeah, there's a lot of good practice that can be learned from our colleagues at CMAC. Thank you. Lindsay, thanks.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Alex. Lindsay Cottrell from the Conflict and Environment Observatory. You did include questions on environment policy and action before you introduced the criteria. So have you seen a shift in how those are answered now that you've actually scoring it?
I think we definitely have, and I don't know if that's a combination probably of scoring it, adding weight to it, and increasing its importance within our reports, but also the way that it's progressing within the sector as well. So quite frequently in the past we would receive zero, just blank spaces, and now we get really comprehensive answers often, and if we don't, we follow that up, and it's quite unusual for a state party now to report nothing to us, which is really great. So hopefully that continues.
And I think it will only kind of increase because we've now got a strong SEAMREAP 5-year action plan where through the support of civil society, the Environment and Mine Action Working Group and others, there was strong appetite for state parties to actually embed environment and climate throughout the action plan. So I think that will also lead to further kind of monitoring and reporting on it. And the new UNMAS, as Alex says in the technical note. But we're definitely seeing improvement from the blank spaces to more information coming our way. And of course, scoring something is a way of it's also a motivation to share that information and best practice. And within the sector, sometimes it's quite hard to know where there is best practice. So it is good to look at the country reports for people to see what's going on in different countries that are scoring well on the environment, and maybe to echo some of that. So is there an environment focal point in place in a country? Is there strong standards? Some countries are establishing technical working groups on the environment. So all of these things really support implementation, and there's ways that you can really drive it forward from the national authority and ownership level, and not just from the kind of operators level as well. Thanks. Any other questions? No, if not, I think I'll wrap up. I want to thank Alex, but also all of my team for their dedicated efforts. It's a lot of work to put the reports together each year, and also to everyone that contributes to the reports. It really is a collaborative effort, and one that wouldn't be possible without your input. So thank you very much.